I found out that my kids and wife were preparing my funeral to get all my savings. It sounds crazy even to say it out loud, like the kind of thing you'd hear on some late-night talk radio show when people call in with conspiracies. But it wasn't some theory. It wasn't paranoia. I saw it with my own eyes, and the thing about seeing something like that is it changes you forever. There's no going back to the version of yourself that believed in your family without question. It was a Thursday, and I was supposed to be at work. I'd left the house early that morning, kissed my wife on the cheek, ruffled my son's hair, and promised my daughter I'd take her out for ice cream after dinner. Everything was normal, at least it looked that way. I worked construction, which meant unpredictable hours, and that day the foreman called me while I was halfway to the site to say they didn't have enough materials to keep us busy until Monday. So I turned the truck around, figuring I'd surprise everyone by coming home. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something off right away. My wife's car was parked crooked, not the way she usually leaves it. The curtains were drawn even though the sun was shining, and inside I could hear voices. Low, serious, the kind of tone people use when they don't want to be overheard. I thought maybe it was one of those daytime salespeople, or maybe even a neighbor asking for something. But when I eased the door open and stepped inside, I froze. The voices weren't strangers. It was my wife, my son, and my daughter. And what they were talking about made my stomach turn cold. If we make it look like an accident, it'll be faster, my wife was saying. Her voice was calm, like she was discussing groceries. My son, 15 years old and usually more interested in his phone than anything else, said, "But we don't get the money unless it's official. We need the death certificate. If it's too suspicious, they'll investigate." My daughter, just 12, chimed in, "Mom's right. We have to be smart. We can't mess this up." I felt my knees go weak, and I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. My first thought wasn't even betrayal. It was disbelief. Maybe they were rehearsing lines for a school play. Maybe it was some kind of dark joke, something I wasn't meant to hear. But then I saw the papers spread across the dining room table. Insurance forms, bank statements, my own retirement account. They were planning my funeral. I didn't walk in. I didn't confront them right then, though every muscle in my body told me to. Instead, I backed away, slipped out the door as quietly as I'd entered, and sat in my truck shaking so hard I could barely turn the key. My chest hurt, and for a second I thought I might be giving myself the heart attack they seemed to be waiting for. I drove. Not to anywhere in particular, just to keep moving, to keep from screaming. I ended up parked by the river, staring at the water while my whole life replayed in my head. Every birthday party, every Christmas morning, every late night when I stayed up fixing a leaky pipe or grading homework or putting in extra hours so my family could have what I didn't growing up, it all felt like some cruel joke. That night, I didn't go home. I checked into a cheap motel off the highway, the kind with buzzing neon lights and carpets that smelled like mildew. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my work boots, and asked myself the same question over and over. Why? Wasn't I good enough? Didn't I give them everything? Sleep never came. Instead, I kept thinking about the details I'd overheard. They weren't just talking, they had a plan. And if I'd walked in a few minutes later, they might have been talking about when and how. The next day, I returned home like nothing had happened. I smiled, I laughed, I asked about their day. My wife kissed me like she always did. My son shrugged when I asked about school. My daughter hugged me and said she missed ice cream the night before. It all seemed so normal that I wondered if I'd imagined it. But then I saw the corner of a manila folder peeking out from under a pile of magazines on the counter. The same folder with my financial records. That was when I knew it was real. The first few days after that were the hardest. Pretending everything was fine while secretly watching every move they made. I noticed things I never paid attention to before. The way my wife typed on her laptop with a certain focus, the hushed conversations between my kids that stopped when I entered the room, the way the folders seemed to move from one place to another as if they were still working on the details. I couldn't ask anyone for help. Who would believe me if I said my wife and kids were plotting to kill me for money? People would think I was losing my mind. Maybe that's what they were counting on, that if I ever figured it out, no one would take me seriously. But I wasn't crazy. And if they thought I was just going to let them bury me alive while they cashed in on my life's work, they didn't know me as well as they thought. The strange thing about pretending everything was normal is that it almost worked on me, too. You play the part long enough and you start to wonder if maybe you dreamed the whole thing. But every time I thought about letting it go, about convincing myself I misheard, I'd catch another detail that snapped me back to the truth. Like the way my wife asked me casually if I had been keeping up with my doctor's visits. Or the way my son suddenly started taking an interest in whether I wore my seatbelt when I drove. Little things, but they felt loaded now, like questions meant to measure the odds of me not coming home one day. I kept thinking about how long this had been going on. Did it start the moment I got the life insurance policy through the company? Or was it more recent, some desperate scheme because money was tight? I went through my mind, trying to find the exact moment my family turned from people I trusted to people who were quietly sharpening the knife behind my back. One evening, about a week after I overheard them, I stayed up late pretending to fall asleep in front of the TV. When I heard my wife in the kitchen, I slid out of the recliner and crept down the hallway. She was on the phone, speaking low but not low enough. "Yes, I understand. No, I don't think he suspects anything. We're still working on the timeline. I'll call again when it's closer." Her back was to me, and I swear I felt something inside me harden in that moment. It wasn't grief anymore. It wasn't confusion. It was anger, pure and sharp. Not the kind of anger that makes you yell or throw things, but the kind that sits in your chest like a weight, the kind that stays. I thought about walking in and grabbing the phone from her hand, demanding to know who she was talking to, but I didn't. I couldn't, not yet. Because the truth is, I didn't know what I'd do once I had the answer. Instead, I backed away again, retreating into the darkness like a coward. I hated myself for it, but I knew I needed to understand the full picture before I made any move. If I was going to protect myself, I couldn't afford to act on half-truths. The days bled into one another, each one heavier than the last. I started carrying myself differently, more cautious, more deliberate. I checked the locks twice before bed. I tested the brakes on my truck every morning. I even started cooking my own meals instead of eating what was on the table. My wife noticed. She asked why I was being so paranoid, why I wasn't touching the food she made. I shrugged it off, blaming it on a stomach bug or stress from work, but I could see suspicion flicker in her eyes. The kids noticed too. My son rolled his eyes and muttered that I was acting weird. My daughter, though, she watched me closer, like she was studying me. That was the worst part, realizing my little girl, the one I used to read bedtime stories to, might be part of all this. One Saturday morning, I decided to test the waters. We were all sitting at the table, eating breakfast, when I set my fork down and said, "You know, I had the strangest dream last night. Dreamed I died. Whole funeral and everything. You were all there." The room went quiet for a moment, too quiet. My wife laughed a little too quickly, saying, "That's morbid. Maybe lay off the late-night TV before bed." My son just grunted. But my daughter, she froze. Her hand hovered above her plate, and when she finally looked up at me, her eyes darted away just as fast. That was all the confirmation I needed. After that, I stopped waiting for answers to fall into my lap. I started digging. At first it was small things, like going through the trash for torn-up papers or checking the mail before anyone else got to it. But eventually I found myself doing things I never thought I'd do, like sneaking into my wife's email or scrolling through my son's text messages while he was in the shower. The deeper I dug, the darker it got. I found emails to some lawyer I'd never heard of, talking about processing claims quickly after the event. I found browser searches about lethal doses of over-the-counter medications. I even found a note in my son's phone that read, "Dad's schedule, best times." That one almost made me throw up. Every discovery made me feel like I was living in a house of strangers. I'd walk past their bedrooms at night and wonder if they were whispering about me behind those doors, deciding whether tomorrow would be the day. And yet, I still couldn't leave. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was the simple fact that this was my house, my life, my money. They wanted me gone, but I wasn't about to make it that easy for them. The turning point came 2 weeks later, when I found a receipt tucked inside that same manila folder. It was for a prepaid funeral service. My name was on it. My date of birth. The only thing missing was the date of death. I sat in the garage holding that piece of paper, my hands shaking so hard it nearly slipped out of my grip. That was when it stopped being just fear or anger. That was when I understood, fully and finally, that they weren't just talking. They were ready. And if I didn't act soon, I was going to end up in the ground with a nice polished headstone bought with my own money. I sat on that receipt for 3 days. Every time I looked at it, the rage in me got hotter, tighter, like a spring wound to the breaking point. I carried it folded up in my wallet, not because I needed proof anymore, but because it reminded me I wasn't imagining this. It was real. My own family had picked out my coffin, my service, probably even what they were going to say standing over me. On the third night, I came home late. I'd been driving around aimlessly again, chain smoking, trying to figure out how a man even starts a conversation like this. You don't just sit down at dinner and say, "So, when were you planning to kill me?" But the weight of it was eating me alive, and I knew if I didn't face it soon, I'd either snap in some reckless way or drink myself into silence. When I walked through the door, they were all in the living room. My wife on the couch with her laptop, my son glued to his phone, my daughter pretending to do homework at the coffee table. For a moment, they looked so normal it almost stopped me. Almost. I dropped my keys on the counter, pulled the folded paper from my wallet, and set it down on the table in front of them. "Want to explain this?" My wife's head snapped up. My son glanced over, his brows furrowing. My daughter froze mid-scribble. Nobody said a word. "Go on," I said, my voice low but steady. "Somebody start talking. Because I sure as hell didn't buy myself a funeral." My wife's mouth opened, then closed. She leaned back slowly, eyes flicking to the kids like she was calculating something. "Finally," she said, "where did you find that?" "In your folder," I said. "The one with all my bank statements, insurance papers, and little notes about when I'm usually home. Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about. I've seen it all." My son shifted uncomfortably, muttering, This is blown out of proportion." "Shut up," I snapped, louder than I meant to. He went quiet, his face tightening in a way that told me he wasn't used to hearing that tone from me. My wife drew in a breath, straightened her shoulders, and tried to put on that calm, practical face she used when the kids were in trouble. "You don't understand," she said. "It's not what you think." "Not what I think." I laughed, though it sounded more like a bark. "You've got my name on a funeral plan. You've been talking about my death in this house like it's a weekend project. What exactly am I supposed to think?" My daughter finally spoke, her voice small. "Dad, just listen." "No." I slammed my fist against the table, the sound making her flinch. That killed me inside, but I was past the point of keeping gentle. "I have been listening. I listened when you three sat in this very room and talked about making it look like an accident. I listened when your mother called someone on the phone and said I didn't suspect anything. I've been listening for weeks, pretending I didn't know, while the people I love most have been plotting my death." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. My wife was the first to break it. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she whispered. That chilled me more than anything. Supposed to be like what, exactly? Her eyes glistened, but there was no apology in them, only a tired sort of resignation. "We didn't have a choice." I felt my heart pounding in my ears. "You didn't have a choice? You had every choice in the world. You could have asked me for help. You could have told me the truth, whatever it is. But instead you decided the only way forward was to kill me off and cash the check." My son finally looked up from his phone, his jaw tight. "It's not that simple, Dad." "Oh, it's simple enough for me," I shot back. "Either you love me and respect me as your father, or you're willing to put me in the ground for money. Which is it?" Nobody answered. Not a damn one of them. That silence cut deeper than any words could. I grabbed the receipt off the table and held it up, shaking it in the air. "You listen to me. If I find out that one more call gets made, one more plan gets written down, one more receipt with my name on it shows up in this house, I swear to God, I won't be the one leaving. You will. All of you." I expected anger, shouting, denial. Instead, they just sat there staring at me like strangers. Finally, my wife said softly, "You don't know what's coming. You think this is about money, but it's bigger than that. You should have never overheard us." And then she stood up and walked down the hall, leaving me there with two kids who couldn't even look me in the eye. I stayed in the living room long after they'd gone to bed, staring at the shadows on the wall, trying to wrap my head around what she meant. Bigger than money? What the hell else could it be? By the time the sun came up, I realized something I didn't want to admit. Maybe I didn't know my own family at all anymore. After that night in the living room, things in the house shifted. Not suddenly, not in any way you'd notice from the outside, but in a quiet, creeping way that gets under your skin. My wife stopped trying to keep up the illusion of normalcy. No more small talk, no more warm smiles when I came home. Instead, she moved around me like I was already a ghost, like I was a piece of furniture she had to navigate around. My kids weren't much different. My son avoided me almost entirely, locking himself in his room with his phone, while my daughter put on the same forced politeness you'd give a stranger at the dinner table. The hardest part wasn't their distance. It was the way I found myself missing them, even while they were right there under the same roof. I'd spent my whole life working to give them stability, to make sure they had everything I didn't. And now, sitting across from them at breakfast, watching them chew their food and not meet my eyes, I realized I'd lost them long before I ever heard those words in the dining room. I told myself I needed to be smart. If they were planning something, I had to get ahead of it. So I started leaving traps, little ways to test them. I'd forget my phone recording in the kitchen, or I'd leave a fake pill bottle on the counter, or I'd talk loudly on the phone about changing my insurance beneficiaries just to see how they reacted. The reactions came. My wife started asking questions she'd never asked before. When exactly I'd be home, if I'd made any changes to the will, if I'd talked to anyone about our finances. My son got bolder too, rolling his eyes at me when I asked where he was going, muttering under his breath about how none of this would be a problem if Dad would just let go. That last one stuck with me. Let go. What the hell did he mean by that? Then came the night I nearly died, or at least, the night I became sure they were willing to speed things along. It was a rainy Tuesday. I'd worked a double shift and dragged myself home just before midnight. I was starving, so I opened the fridge and found a plate of lasagna waiting. My wife almost never saved me food, but there it was, covered in foil with my name on it. For a split second, I wanted to believe it was kindness. But when I peeled back the foil, something didn't smell right. The sauce had a bitterness to it, sharp and chemical, not like anything I'd ever tasted in her cooking before. I stood there in the kitchen holding the fork, my stomach twisting, my throat dry. I thought about taking a bite, just to prove I wasn't paranoid. But in the end, I scraped it into the trash and went to bed hungry. The next morning, I checked the trash. The lasagna was gone. Not just tossed deeper down, the plate itself was missing. My wife must have taken it out, cleaned up the evidence. That was the moment I knew I wasn't imagining things. They weren't just planning anymore, they were trying. The paranoia became unbearable. I stopped eating anything I didn't cook myself. I started locking the bedroom door at night, pushing a chair under the handle like some motel drifter. I even kept a baseball bat next to the bed. Every creak in the floorboards, every whisper of voices behind closed doors, felt like the lead up to my last breath. But here's the thing, living like that changes you. It eats at you until you start doing things you didn't think you were capable of. One night, I followed my wife. She said she was going to the grocery store, but I tailed her from a distance in my truck. Instead of turning toward the store, she drove out past the edge of town, down a narrow road that led to a shuttered warehouse. I killed my headlights and parked far back, watching as she got out of the car and slipped inside. She was gone for over an hour. When she came out, she wasn't carrying groceries. She was carrying a folder under her arm, the same kind of manila folder I'd seen at the house. I wanted to jump out right then, demand to know what she was doing, but something told me to wait. So I drove home ahead of her, slipped inside, and pretended to be asleep on the couch when she came in. She set the folder down on the counter, and I caught just a glimpse before she tucked it away. A name printed across the front in black marker, Project Harrow. That was the first time I realized this wasn't just about insurance money. Something else was going on. Something I didn't understand. The next morning, I searched everywhere for that folder, but she must have hidden it well. No matter how much I turned the house upside down, it was gone. That week, my son stopped going to school. He claimed he was sick, but when I pressed him, he got angry. "Why do you care?" he shouted. "You won't be around much longer anyway." I wanted to smack him, but instead I just stared, my voice flat when I finally said, "You're right. I won't. But when I go, it won't be the way you think." That shut him up. For a little while. By the end of the month, I was unraveling. My job suffered because I couldn't focus. My buddies stopped inviting me out for beers because I always turned them down. And at home, the walls felt like they were closing in. I started drinking more at night, just to sleep. Sometimes I'd wake up in the dark with the bat still in my hands, convinced someone had been standing over me. Then came the second confrontation, one I didn't plan. It was late again, maybe 1 or 2 in the morning. I got up to grab a glass of water and heard voices in the kitchen. Not whispers this time. Clear, urgent voices. I crept closer until I could make out the words. "He's getting suspicious," my wife was saying. "We don't have time to wait anymore," my son replied. His voice was low, hard. Project Harrow has a deadline, my wife snapped. That word again. Harrow. I stepped into the doorway before I could stop myself. What the hell is Project Harrow? They spun around, both of them freezing like deer in headlights. My wife's mouth opened, but nothing came out. My son just glared at me, defiant, like I was the intruder in my own house. Answer me, I growled. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my own family is working on something that ends with me 6 feet under. Neither of them spoke. Finally, my daughter appeared from the hallway, rubbing her eyes like she'd just woken up. She looked at me, then at them, and whispered, "He's not supposed to know yet." That broke me. Not supposed to know? I shouted. I'm not supposed to know my wife and kids are planning my funeral? That my life is some goddamn project with a deadline? My wife tried to calm her voice, but it came out shaking. It's not what you think. You can't understand. Not yet. Then make me understand, I said, my throat raw. Because right now, the only thing I see is betrayal. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then my wife picked up the phone from the counter and dialed. She didn't even look at me while she spoke. He found out, she said into the receiver. Yes, we'll need to accelerate. I knocked the phone out of her hand. It clattered across the floor, and I roared. Who the hell are you talking to? Her eyes met mine finally, cold and steady. You'll see soon enough. When my wife hung up the phone, or tried to before I knocked it away, something inside me broke. That calm, practical woman I'd shared a life with wasn't there anymore. Her eyes weren't even her eyes. They were flat, like she'd already made peace with a future where I didn't exist. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with the bat across my lap, staring at the front door, waiting for whoever she had called to show up. Every car that passed made my pulse race. But nobody came. Not that night, anyway. The next morning, I tried to get answers. I pushed her into the kitchen and slammed the counter with my hand. Tell me what Project Harrow is, and who the hell you're working with. Now. But she just looked at me with pity, of all things, and said, You'll find out soon enough. Stop fighting it. Stop fighting what? I demanded. She didn't answer. She just turned her back and started making coffee like we were having a normal morning. That was when I realized I couldn't do this alone anymore. If I was going to survive, I needed someone outside this house to believe me. I started with my best friend, Rick. We'd known each other since high school, worked jobs together, drank together. If anyone would back me up, it'd be him. We met at a bar after work, and after a couple beers, I laid it all out. The overheard conversations, the funeral receipt, the poisoned food, Project Harrow. Rick stared at me for a long time, then leaned back and said, Buddy, are you sure you're not just burned out? Stress can make you think crazy things. I slammed my fist on the table hard enough to rattle the glasses. Does this sound like stress? I pulled the folded funeral receipt from my wallet and shoved it in front of him. He picked it up, looked it over, then set it back down slowly. All right, that's weird, I'll give you that. But it doesn't prove they're trying to kill you. Jesus, Rick, I shouted. Heads turned from other tables. I lowered my voice. They bought me a funeral. They've got a goddamn project name attached to it. What else do I need to prove? He sighed, rubbing his forehead. Look, man, if you really think you're in danger, go to the cops. Don't drag me into this. That stung worse than I expected. Rick had been my brother for years, and here he was, backing away like I was contagious. But I took his advice. The next day, I went to the police station, sat down with an officer, and told him everything. He listened, nodded, and when I handed over the receipt, he frowned and said he'd look into it. But the way he looked at me, it was the same way people look at drunks talking about UFOs. A week went by, and nothing. No calls, no follow-ups. Just silence. Meanwhile, things at home got worse. My son started shadowing me, watching me with that same cold glare. My daughter avoided me completely, slipping past me in the hallway like I wasn't even there. And my wife? She didn't hide her contempt anymore. One night, she even said, You're making this harder than it has to be. If you'd just accept it, we could all move on. Accept what? Death? Betrayal? I wanted to shake her until she snapped out of it, but I knew she was too far gone. Then came the night everything collapsed. I came home late again, bone-tired, and as I walked up the driveway, I noticed something off. The garage door was open, though I'd shut it that morning. Inside, the truck was idling, exhaust pouring into the space. I froze. They were trying to smoke me out, make it look like an accident. Carbon monoxide poisoning, clean, quiet, easy. For a second, I almost laughed. After all the paranoia, all the nights with the bat in my hands, this was how they wanted to do it? But the laugh died quick when I realized how close I'd come. If I'd gone straight inside without noticing, I'd have been dead in my bed before sunrise. I stormed into the house, furious, ready to finally tear the truth out of them. They were all sitting in the living room, calm as could be, like they hadn't just tried to murder me in the garage. "You sons of bitches," I roared. "You tried to kill me tonight. Don't even deny it. The truck's still running out there." My wife just looked at me, unblinking. "If it had worked, you wouldn't be yelling right now." That shut me up. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because she said it with such calm certainty, like she was discussing the weather. I wanted to hit her. God help me. I've never raised a hand to a woman in my life, but in that moment I wanted to. Instead, I turned and punched the wall, hard enough to split my knuckles. "Why?" I demanded, breathing hard. "Why are you doing this? What the hell is Project Hero?" For the first time, my son spoke with something like pride in his voice. "You're part of it. You always were. You just didn't know." "What does that even mean?" I shouted, but none of them answered. My wife just stood, took the kids by the arms, and led them upstairs like the conversation was over. I stood there alone, bleeding from my hand, realizing I was losing this fight. That night, I packed a bag. Clothes, cash, the few things I thought I might need. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. I couldn't sleep under the same roof as people who wanted me gone. I drove aimlessly for hours before finally pulling into another cheap motel on the edge of town. Sitting there on the stiff mattress, staring at the stained ceiling, I felt it for the first time. Real despair. I tried everything. Friends, cops, even confronting my family head-on, and nothing worked. Nobody believed me. Nobody was going to save me. And worse, I still didn't know what Project Hero was. Only that it was coming, and that my death was part of it. For the first time in my life, I felt truly powerless. I spent 3 nights in that motel, half drunk, half mad, trying to figure out what to do. I'd lie on the bed staring at the ceiling fan spin, my mind replaying every word, every glance from my wife and kids. The betrayal gnawed at me worse than hunger, worse than exhaustion. They weren't just plotting my death, they were calm about it, like they were following instructions. By the 4th morning, I knew I couldn't just hide out forever. If I stayed in that motel, I'd rot away, and sooner or later they'd track me down. They already had a project name attached to me. They had deadlines. Whoever they were working with, they wouldn't stop until I was gone. So I drove. No destination, just miles. Out past the edge of town, through farmland, down 2-lane highways lined with trees that blurred into green tunnels. My truck guzzled gas I couldn't afford, but it didn't matter. I just needed space to think. By late afternoon, I pulled into a roadside diner. The kind with cracked vinyl booths, bad coffee, and a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. I sat at the counter, ordered a plate of eggs and bacon, and tried not to look like a man whose whole world had collapsed. That's when she sat down 2 stools away. She was maybe mid-40s, dark hair pulled back, sharp eyes that flicked over me like she was scanning for weaknesses. At first I thought she was just another traveler, someone passing through. But then she said, without even looking up from her coffee, "They tried the lasagna, didn't they?" My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "What did you just say?" Now she looked at me, and there was no mistaking the recognition in her face. "Lasagna. Bitter taste. You didn't eat it, though? Smart." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "Who the hell are you?" "Name's Claire," she said. She sipped her coffee, unbothered. "And you look like a man who's been marked." I set my fork down carefully, my stomach turning. "Marked for what?" "Project Hero," she said. Just like that. No hesitation. I nearly knocked my coffee over. "You know about it?" She nodded. "More than you'd like to. They've been running versions of it all over the country. Families, like yours, turned against their own. You're not the first." I stared at her, stunned. "Then what the hell is it?" She leaned in close, her voice low. "An experiment. Psychological, biological. They put something in the water, in the air. Hell if I know the exact delivery method. But it changes people. Makes them compliant. Makes them see you not as blood, but as an obstacle. Then they give them incentives to push you out of the picture. Insurance money, debt relief, sometimes even promises of protection. They get your family to do their dirty work for them." I shook my head, my mind reeling. That's insane. My wife, my kids, they'd never. She cut me off. They already did, didn't they? Funeral receipt. Poison in your food. Truck in the garage. You think that's them? No. That's the program. Harrow bends people until they break. Turns love into betrayal. Her words made my stomach churn. I wanted to argue, to say she was crazy, but the truth was everything she said lined up with what I'd seen. The coldness in my wife's eyes. My son talking about deadlines. My daughter whispering that I wasn't supposed to know. I slumped back, feeling the air leave my lungs. Why me? Why us? Claire shrugged. Random selection, maybe. Or maybe you pissed off the wrong person without knowing it. Doesn't matter. Once you're in, you're in. I stared down at my plate, appetite gone. So what the hell am I supposed to do? Her voice softened. You fight back. But you can't do it alone. That's why I'm here. I looked up sharply. Why you? Why help me? For the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Pain. Because I lost my husband to Harrow last year. He didn't see it coming. By the time he realized, it was too late. His own brother put him in the ground. And I promised myself I wouldn't let it happen to anyone else if I could help it. The diner felt suddenly too small, the walls closing in. I rubbed my face with both hands, trying to process it all. So what? You're some kind of resistance. She gave a half smile. You could call it that. There's a handful of us. People who've lost someone. People who got out. We share information, try to throw wrenches in the machine where we can. Doesn't always work, but it's better than rolling over. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But trust didn't come easy anymore. Not after what my own family had done. How do I know you're not part of it? I asked. You don't, she said simply. You just have to decide whether you'd rather die alone or take the risk of having an ally. We sat in silence for a while after that, the hum of the diner's old refrigerator filling the space. Finally, I said, all right, say I believe you. What's the next step? Claire leaned in, lowering her voice. We find where your wife's been meeting them. You said she went to a warehouse, right? That's not random. They always use abandoned places for their meetings. Less chance of prying eyes. My heart thudded in my chest. You think they're still using it? I'd bet on it, she said. And if they are, we can get proof. Documents, recordings, names. Enough to finally show the world this isn't just paranoia. Her certainty lit a spark in me I thought was gone. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than fear and anger. I felt hope. Small, fragile, but real. I nodded slowly. Then let's do it. We left the diner that night, my heart pounding like I'd stepped into a whole new world. Having Claire by my side didn't erase the fear, but it gave it shape. Before, I'd been flailing, drowning in suspicion and betrayal. Now, at least, I had someone who believed me, and someone who had already seen what Project Harrow could do. She rode with me in the truck, giving quick directions as we wound through back roads. You said she went past town, out near the warehouses, right? Which one? There's an old grain storage plant, I said. Been shut down for years. She went in there for over an hour. Came out with a folder. Claire nodded. That'll be it. They like places where nobody asks questions. We parked a quarter-mile away and approached on foot, flashlights off, moving quiet. My boots crunched on gravel, every sound too loud in the still night. The place loomed ahead, rusted silos, broken windows, weeds sprouting through cracked pavement. Claire crouched near a side entrance. You sure you're ready? She whispered. I swallowed hard. I've been ready since the night I found that receipt. Inside, the air was thick with dust and mildew. We crept through dark hallways lined with old machinery until we reached a room that still had light. Faint, but unmistakable. Claire motioned for me to stop, then peered around the corner. Her eyes widened. She waved me closer. I leaned in, heart hammering. Through the doorway, I saw a makeshift office. Folding tables covered in files and laptops, whiteboards with coded notes, maps pinned with red tacks. And standing there, going through a stack of papers, was a man I'd never seen before. Middle-aged, tall, suit jacket hanging open. He looked like some government type, the kind you see testifying on C-SPAN. On the whiteboard behind him, written in block letters, were the words, Project Harrow, Phase 3. I stared, trying to make sense of it. Claire pulled out a small recording device from her jacket and whispered, We need proof. Stay here. But before she could move, the man's voice carried across the room. The subject is aware. I froze. Claire and I looked at each other, panic in her eyes. He wasn't talking to anyone we could see, but his tone was flat, clinical, like he was reporting into an earpiece. He confronted his family directly. The man continued. Resistance level higher than expected. Recommend acceleration. My blood ran cold. He was talking about me. Claire tugged my sleeve, pulling me back into the shadows. We crouched there, barely breathing, as the man picked up a folder from the table and said, Target name, Daniel Moore. Subject code, H217. I nearly fell backward. That was my name. My code. They had files on me. Claire squeezed my arm hard. We have to get that folder. But before we could move, footsteps echoed through the building. More people were coming. 2 men in dark clothes entered the room, speaking in low tones. They weren't cops. They weren't guards. They looked military. The suited man handed them the folder. Deliver this to the family. Final instructions inside. I bit down on my tongue to keep from shouting. Final instructions. For my death. As the men turned to leave, Claire grabbed my wrist. We can't take them head on. Follow. We slipped deeper into the warehouse, moving through the shadows, keeping just behind them. They exited through a side door, got into a black SUV, and drove off. I wanted to chase them, ram their car off the road, get that folder back no matter the cost. But Claire held me firm. Not yet. We can't lose ourselves to anger. We'll get another chance. We drove back to the motel, my hands shaking on the wheel the whole time. Inside, Claire laid out what we'd seen. It's bigger than just your family. Files, maps, phases. This is a coordinated program. And you? You're not just some random husband they want gone. You're a subject. H217. The number echoed in my head, over and over. Why me? I asked. My voice cracked. Why not somebody else? Claire looked at me carefully. Did anything unusual happen in your life, maybe a year or 2 back? A medical treatment, an accident, something that felt off? I thought back. The answer came slower than I expected. There was a car wreck. About 18 months ago. I walked away with barely a scratch, but the EMTs insisted on taking me to the hospital anyway. Kept me overnight. Said they were just being cautious. Claire nodded grimly. That was it. They tagged you then. Probably put something in your system, tracking, monitoring, maybe even more. I shook my head, rage boiling up. So this whole time, my own family's been manipulated into turning against me because I'm some lab rat in a goddamn experiment? Yes, Claire said softly. And if we don't stop it, they'll finish what they started. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands gripping my knees so hard my knuckles turned white. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the full weight of it. Not just betrayal, but violation. My life hadn't just been targeted, it had been engineered. Then Claire said the thing that pushed it all over the edge. They don't just study what happens when families betray each other. They study what happens when you fight back. Every move you make, every word, every choice. It's all part of their data. I looked up slowly. You're telling me, this whole time, even me resisting, even me running, that's what they wanted? She nodded. Exactly. And now you've reached the point most subjects don't. You've seen the inner workings. That's why they're accelerating. They can't risk you knowing too much. I buried my face in my hands. For weeks I thought I was fighting for my life, clawing against betrayal. But in reality, I was playing right into their hands. Every tear, every scream, every sleepless night, they'd planned for it. For the first time, I understood what true hopelessness felt like. Claire sat beside me, resting a hand on my shoulder. We're not done. There's more to uncover, and if we can get proof out, we might finally expose Harrow. But you have to understand, you're in deeper than most. And that means the price will be higher. I lifted my head, eyes burning. Then let's pay it. After Claire told me the truth, sleep became impossible. I'd close my eyes and see that warehouse office, the maps, the folders with my name on them. Subject H217. Not a man, not a father, not a husband, just an entry in a program. Every conversation I'd had with my wife and kids replayed in my head, but now I heard them differently. My sons talk about deadlines. My wife saying it was bigger than money. My daughter whispering I wasn't supposed to know. It wasn't just betrayal, it was programming. They'd been bent until they didn't see me as theirs anymore. I sat on the edge of that motel bed, fists clenched, and made a choice. If I was going to die, and maybe I already knew I wasn't going down quietly. I wasn't going to give Harrow the data they wanted. Claire came back from a phone call, tossing a set of car keys on the table. We don't have much time. I reached out to one of my contacts. There's a facility 2 towns over. Secondary site. If we hit it tonight, we might get something solid. I looked up at her. Proof, she said. Names, funding, maybe even distribution methods. Enough to finally blow the lid. I stood, pulling my jacket on. Then let's go. The drive was tense. Claire drove this time, her eyes fixed on the road, hands steady. I stared out the window, watching dark farmland roll by. My mind wouldn't stop racing. Finally, I said, what if I don't make it? What if Harrow gets me before we can do anything? Claire didn't look over. Then we make sure your death isn't wasted. That's the only way to win against them. You give meaning to what they try to erase. Her words hit hard. I thought about my kids, how they used to laugh and fight and cling to me when they were small. I wondered if they'd ever come back to themselves, if the program wore off after the subject was gone. Or would they just move on, hollowed out, never realizing what had been stolen from them? The facility sat behind chain-link fences topped with barbed wire. It didn't look abandoned like the warehouse. This place was alive, lit with floodlights, humming with generators. A handful of trucks were parked out front. Claire cut the engine a good distance away. We go on foot. Stay low. We slipped through a hole in the fence, hearts pounding, every shadow a threat. At the back of the building, we found a service door cracked open. Claire drew a small handgun from inside her jacket, the first time I'd seen her armed. You ever shoot? She whispered. I shook my head. She pressed the weapon into my hand anyway. Then tonight's a good night to learn. Inside, the facility looked sterile, almost hospital-like. White walls, humming fluorescent lights, rooms with glass windows. Some were filled with machines I couldn't name, others with filing cabinets and computers. We crept down a hallway until voices stopped us. Phase 3 is entering critical stage. Subject H-217 is destabilizing faster than predicted. That was me. Claire's jaw tightened. She motioned me closer to the doorway. Inside the room, 3 people in lab coats stood around a table covered in files. On the wall, a screen displayed a series of photos, shots of me at work, at home, even at the motel. They'd been watching everything. One of them pointed to the screen. Family unit is still compliant. However, contact with external elements has accelerated unpredictability. Recommend immediate containment. Containment. Another repeated, scribbling notes. I knew what that meant. Death. Claire whispered, we need those files. We burst into the room before I could think twice. The scientists froze, wide-eyed. I leveled the gun with shaking hands. Don't move, I said, my voice cracking but loud enough. Slide those folders over. Now. One of them hesitated. Claire didn't. She grabbed him by the collar, slammed him against the wall, and hissed, do it. They obeyed. A stack of folders slid across the table. I grabbed them, my eyes catching words as I flipped through. Behavioral conditioning, familial breakdown metrics, subject elimination protocols. My stomach turned. This wasn't just me. There were dozens of names. Hundreds. Claire stuffed the folders into her bag, but one of the scientists smirked. You think this matters? Harrow isn't one facility. It's everywhere. You could burn this building down and it wouldn't slow us. Before I could react, an alarm blared. Red lights flashed overhead. Claire cursed under her breath. They tripped a silent alarm. We've got to move. We bolted down the hallway, clutching the bag. Behind us, doors slammed open, footsteps thundered. At the end of the hall, we crashed into a loading bay. Floodlights snapped on, and men in black tactical gear poured in from both sides. Guns raised, voices booming. Drop your weapon. Hands on your head. I froze. Claire grabbed my arm. Run. But where? The exit was blocked. The men closed in, their boots pounding on concrete. Then Claire shoved me toward a side door. Go. I'll hold them off. I spun on her. No. Go, damn it. She fired 2 shots toward the advancing men, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. I stumbled through the door, clutching the folders to my chest, sprinting blindly into the night. Bullets cracked behind me, shouts echoed, but I just kept running until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I collapsed behind a row of dumpsters, gasping, the bag still clutched in my arms. When I finally looked inside, I saw the truth in black and white. Not just files on me. Files on hundreds of families. Whole towns mapped out. Names of subjects crossed off with neat red lines. Every one of those red lines meant somebody who never made it. Somebody like me. And Claire, she was gone. I sat there in the dark, alone, the weight of the files pressing down like a coffin lid. I'd survived, but at what cost? My ally, maybe the only person who could have kept me alive, had been left behind. I was alive, but I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt like a man carrying death on paper, and no matter where I went, Harrow would come for me. For the first time, I wondered if fighting was worth it at all. I didn't sleep that night. I sat crouched behind those dumpsters, the folder of stolen files pressed to my chest like a lifeline, waiting for the sound of boots or gunfire. But no one came. By dawn, the adrenaline had drained from my body, leaving me hollow. Claire was gone. Taken, killed, I didn't know which. And I was left with nothing but paper proof of a nightmare too big for me to carry. I made my way back to the truck, kept it off the main roads, and drove until I ran out of gas. In a nameless town, I used the last of my cash to fill the tank and buy stale coffee. Sitting in that parking lot, staring at the sunrise, I knew I couldn't keep running. Harrow had eyes everywhere. Motel rooms, gas stations, even diners, they'd always find me. I unfolded one of the files. It was stamped in bold letters, Subject Elimination Timeline. H-217. That was me, my timeline. And there, at the bottom, was today's date. I let out a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sob. They weren't chasing me. They were corralling me. Every move I'd made had already been predicted, recorded, and slotted into their plan. That was when I made the only decision that still felt like mine. I wouldn't die on their schedule. I drove back home. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the siding faded, the porch sagging a little. My wife's car was in the driveway, the curtains drawn. For a long time I just sat there in the truck, staring. This was where everything had started. The family dinners, the overheard whispers, the slow unraveling. If Harrow wanted me gone, this was where they'd expect it to end. Fine, I thought. Let it end here. But on my terms. I carried the folders inside. My wife was in the kitchen, my son slouched on the couch, my daughter at the table with her school books. They all looked up when I walked in, surprise flickering across their faces. You weren't supposed to come back, my wife said flatly. Yeah, well, I said, dropping the folders on the table. I'm full of surprises. My son sneered. It doesn't matter. They said tonight. I stepped closer, my voice low and sharp. Who said? The men in the warehouse? The ones feeding you instructions like your wind-up toys? My wife's eyes narrowed. You saw them. I saw everything. I snapped. I flipped open one of the files, shoving it toward them. They don't care about you. Don't you see that? You're just pawns. They'll chew you up and spit you out once I'm gone. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker in my daughter's eyes. She looked at the papers, then at me. Is it true? She whispered. My wife grabbed her arm, pulling her close. Don't listen to him. He's unstable. That's what they said would happen. I slammed my fist on the table. Unstable? I'm the only one left who remembers what love felt like in this house. You think this is you talking? It's not. It's Harrow. It's the poison in your heads. The room went quiet. My son clenched his fists, his jaw trembling. For a second I thought he might lunge at me. Instead he muttered, They promised we'd be safe if you were gone. There it was. The hook they'd used on my family. Safety. Security. The thing every father wants to give his kids, twisted into a weapon. I lowered my voice, fighting back tears. Safe from what? From me? I'm the one who built this roof over your heads. I'm the one who bled for every dollar that paid for your school, your food, your lives. Safe. They don't want you safe. They want you empty, obedient. And when I'm gone, they'll find another subject. Another family. My wife's lips trembled, just slightly. But before she could answer, a knock came at the door. 3 sharp raps. The air in the room turned heavy. My son stood, pale. My wife whispered, It's them. I grabbed the bat from by the door, the same one I'd kept in my room during those sleepless nights. My hands gripped it tight, knuckles white. Go upstairs, I told my kids. Now. They didn't move. My daughter's eyes brimmed with tears. My son's fists clenched at his sides. The knock came again, louder this time. My wife whispered, If you open that door, it's over. I turned to her, something breaking loose inside me. It's already over. But maybe I can take back one piece before they bury me. I yanked the door open. 3 men in black stood there, the same type I'd seen at the warehouse. No insignia, No badges, just blank expressions. The one in front said, H. 217. Subject terminated today. Step aside. My grip on the bat tightened. Not today. They moved forward, but I swung hard, catching the lead man across the temple. He dropped. The other two lunged, grabbing my arms, forcing me back into the house. My son screamed. My daughter cried out. My wife just stood frozen. I thrashed, roared, swung the bat again, but they were stronger. They slammed me against the wall, pinning me. The lead man, bleeding from his head, stood back up slowly. He pulled a pistol from his jacket and leveled it at me. This is the end of your line, he said. And in that moment, something shifted in my family. My daughter darted forward, grabbing one of the folders from the table. She held it up, shouting, "He's telling the truth. Look." The men turned their heads for just a second, but that second was enough. I wrenched free, swung the bat with everything I had, and the gun went clattering across the floor. Chaos erupted. My son tackled one of the men, rage spilling out of him. My daughter screamed, throwing papers into the air. My wife finally moved, slamming the door shut as if it could hold back the storm. And me? I kept swinging, not because I thought I'd win, but because it was all I had left. Raw, stubborn refusal. The men fought back, their fists heavy, their grips like iron. My vision blurred with blood, my ribs screamed, but I didn't stop. If this was how I went out, it would be with my hands clenched and my family watching me fight for them, not against them. In the chaos, my wife screamed something I'll never forget. They said if you resisted, they'd take all of us. And then it hit me. That was the choice. It wasn't just me anymore. If I fought to the death, they'd kill my wife and kids too. If I gave in, maybe, just maybe, they'd be spared. I staggered back, chest heaving, bat slipping from my hands. Blood filled my mouth. I whispered, "Take me. Leave them." The lead man raised the pistol again, his cold eyes locked on mine. For a moment, I thought it was over. But then my daughter screamed, "No," and hurled the folder at him. Papers exploded in the air like confetti, scattering proof of Harrow across the floor. The men hesitated, just for a second. And that second was enough to keep us alive, for now. When the fight was over, the living room looked like a war zone. Furniture overturned, papers scattered across the floor like snow, blood smeared on the walls. Two of the men lay unconscious, maybe dead. I didn't stop to check. The third had stumbled out the door, clutching his head, but I knew he'd be back. Harrow didn't let go of its subjects. I stood there swaying, every rib screaming, my knuckles split open, blood dripping from my mouth. My wife stood frozen by the door, her chest heaving. My son crouched beside the couch, fists trembling, his eyes wide like he was seeing me for the first time. My daughter sat on the floor clutching one of the files to her chest, tears streaking her face. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The silence pressed down heavier than any blow I'd taken. Finally, my wife whispered, "You weren't lying." I turned to her, my vision swimming. "No," and I wished to God I had been. She stepped forward slowly, picking up one of the scattered papers. Her eyes scanned the words, behavioral manipulation index, subject dependency ratios, and her face crumpled. "They used us," she murmured. "All this time they used us." My son's voice was hoarse when he spoke. I thought we'd be safe if we did what they said. I wanted to hate him for admitting it, but I couldn't. He was 15. He was scared. They'd preyed on that fear, turned it into a weapon. I dropped the bat and sank into the nearest chair, my body too broken to stand any longer. "You're not safe?" I said, my voice ragged. "None of us are. As long as Harrow exists, we'll always be targets. The only difference now is we know the truth." My daughter crawled to me, clutching the folder tighter. "What do we do, Dad?" The question hit me harder than any fist. I was supposed to have answers. Fathers were supposed to guide, to protect. But the truth was I didn't know. I had proof, but proof didn't mean anything if the world refused to believe it. I tried the cops. I tried my friends. They'd written me off as paranoid. I rubbed my bloody face with my hands, staring at the chaos around us. First, we survived the night. We gathered the scattered papers, stuffed them into a duffel bag. Every name, every map, every protocol we could find, all of it went with us. My wife patched my wounds as best she could, her hands trembling. My son stood watch at the window with the bat. My daughter wouldn't let go of my arm. By dawn, we were gone. The house we'd built our lives in, the home where birthdays and holidays had once felt safe, was left behind. We piled into the truck and drove without speaking, the air thick with everything we couldn't say. Hours passed. Towns blurred. I kept waiting for black SUVs in the mirror, for men in suits, at every gas station. But the roads were empty. Too empty. They'll let us run, I muttered. My wife looked over at me. Why? Because it's part of the program, I said. They'll watch us scramble, measure how far we go, how long it takes before we break. Nobody answered. The truth was too heavy. By afternoon, we pulled into another nameless town. We checked into a roadside motel, 1 room, 2 beds, peeling wallpaper. My daughter curled up beside me, still clutching that folder. My son sat by the window, silent. My wife paced the room like a caged animal. Finally, she stopped and said, "We can't just keep running. We need to fight back." I looked at her, surprised. This was the same woman who'd once calmly planned my funeral, and now she was talking about resistance. How? I asked. The files, she said, nodding toward the bag. We leak them. Online, the news, whatever it takes. If people see what Harrow's doing, they'll have to listen. I shook my head. You think they'll let that happen? You think Harrow hasn't thought of that? These files aren't just evidence, they're bait. They want us to spread them so they can trace us, track who's willing to believe. My son finally spoke. So what then? We just hide forever? His words hit me hard. I thought of Claire, her promise to fight, her sacrifice so I could carry those files out. I thought of the hundreds of red lines through names, every one of them a person who didn't make it. And I realized hiding wasn't an option. Not anymore. No, I said slowly. We fight, but on our terms. My wife sat beside me, searching my face. What does that mean? I looked at each of them in turn, my son, my daughter, my wife, and I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks, the weight of love. Twisted, poisoned, manipulated, yes, but still there, buried under the rubble Harrow had piled on top. It means we stop being subjects in their experiment, I said. We stop reacting the way they expect. We don't give them their data. We become unpredictable. My daughter's voice was small but steady. And if that means we don't make it, I squeezed her hand. Then we make damn sure they remember us. That night, as they slept, I sat by the window staring out at the highway. The duffel bag sat at my feet, heavy with paper and blood. I thought about driving away alone, drawing Harrow's attention to me and sparing my family. But when I looked back at them, my son's face slack with exhaustion, my daughter curled into her mother, I knew I couldn't leave them again. If Harrow wanted a confrontation, they were going to get one. But it wouldn't be one man against a machine. It would be a family, broken and bruised, but still standing together. And for the first time, I realized maybe that was the one thing Harrow could never predict. We didn't last a week before Harrow found us again. It started small, the kind of things you'd almost brush off if you didn't know better. The same car parked outside the motel for 3 nights in a row. The TV in the lobby accidentally switched to a news story about domestic terrorists who sounded suspiciously like me. A strange clicking sound on the motel phone when my wife tried to call her sister. By the 4th night, I woke up to find an envelope slid under the door. My name typed across it. Daniel Moore, subject H, 217. Inside was a single sheet of paper. You cannot run. You cannot hide. Terminate yourself, or we will terminate them. I stared at it until the letters blurred. My wife found me sitting on the floor with it in my hands. She read it, her face pale, then tore it into shreds. But tearing paper didn't erase the threat. That was when I knew we couldn't keep running from town to town. Harrow would always be one step ahead. If we wanted even the slimmest chance at freedom, we had to flip the script. We drove back to the city. It felt insane, returning to the place where everything started, but hiding hadn't saved us. Maybe turning the spotlight on Harrow would. We checked into another motel, this one near the edge of downtown, and spent the night sorting through the files. Hundreds of pages, codes, names, dates. Whole family units broken down like math problems. Success rates. Termination protocols. Notes on emotional destabilization. My son stared at one page, his hands shaking. They wrote about me. They measured every time I yelled at you. Every time I talked back. It's all here. My daughter whispered, it's like they own us. I put a hand on both their shoulders. Not if we take this public. My wife looked at me, doubt clouding her eyes. And if nobody believes us, then at least we go down fighting, I said. She didn't argue. Not anymore. The next morning, I walked into a newsroom with the bag slung over my shoulder. Local paper, small staff. I asked to see the editor. The receptionist frowned at my bloody knuckles, my torn jacket, the shadows under my eyes, but she called him down. I sat across from the man, gray-haired, glasses, tired face, and dumped the files onto his desk. This, I said, is proof of a program called Harrow. They're turning families against their own, using them to kill and cover it up. My family was one of them. If you don't publish this, more people will die. He flipped through a few pages, frowning deeper with each one. Finally, he set them down and leaned back. Sir, if this is a prank, it's not funny. If it's delusion, I'd advise you to seek help. My stomach dropped. I'm not crazy, I said through clenched teeth. He sighed. I didn't say you were. But think about what you're claiming. A secret program that controls families and stages deaths for insurance payouts? It's unpublishable without corroboration. Corroboration? I barked. These files are corroboration. He shook his head. Without a source, without a second line of proof, it's just paper. Anyone could print this. I'm sorry. And just like that, the hope I'd been holding on to slipped through my fingers. That night, back at the motel, I told my family what happened. My son cursed. My daughter cried. My wife sat silently on the bed, staring at the carpet. Finally, she said, they'll never let it out. They've thought of everything. If we can't run, and we can't expose them, what's left? I looked at her, then at my kids, and I knew the answer. It wasn't one I liked, but it was the only one left. We disappear, I said. My son frowned. What do you mean? We stop being Daniel, Lisa, Mark, and Emily Moore. We burn the IDs. We leave the truck. We go off the grid. Harrow can't use us if we stop existing. My wife whispered. And if they find us anyway? I swallowed hard. Then we fight until we can't. The next days blurred. We sold what little we had left for cash, bought supplies from pawn shops and secondhand stores, burned our IDs in a metal trash can behind the motel. I shaved my beard, dyed my hair with a box from the drugstore. My wife cut hers short. The kids cried as they destroyed their school IDs, their phones, their photos. It felt like burying ourselves alive. The night we left, I stood in the parking lot staring at the duffel bag of files. I'd carried them like they were holy scripture, but they hadn't saved us. If anything, they'd only dragged us deeper. My wife came up behind me. What are you going to do with them? I thought about Claire, about Rick, about the editor who looked at me like I was insane, about the men in black who would never stop. Finally, I zipped the bag shut. We take them. Even if the world doesn't believe, we remember. That's all we can do. We drove into the dark. No destination, no plan beyond survival. My kids slept in the back seat, my wife beside me staring out the window. I gripped the wheel so tight my hands cramped. And as the road unspooled in front of us, I couldn't shake the question clawing at the back of my mind. Was I saving my family, or just dragging them deeper into the experiment? Because if Claire had been right, if Harrow studied not just death but resistance, then maybe everything I'd done, running, fighting, gathering files, even trying to disappear, was still feeding their data. Maybe the only real choice left was the one they didn't expect. I thought about swerving the truck off the road, ending it for all of us before Harrow could take another piece. I thought about disappearing into the woods and burning every scrap of paper, denying them their proof. I thought about surrendering, walking into their arms and begging them to let my family live. Each choice felt like its own kind of death. I kept driving. The kids stirred in the back seat. My wife's head leaned against the glass, and I realized I didn't have an answer. Maybe I never would. But I knew this much. Whatever Harrow wanted me to do next, I wouldn't give it to them. Even if it meant dying on the run, even if it meant dragging my family into the dark with me, the one thing I still had left was the ability to defy them. And maybe, in the end, that was enough.